Ready? Okay. Okay, thank you, GMAT Club. And just guys, before we start, GMAT Club is, just so you know, is running a giveaway where one of you will have the chance to win GMAT Club tests every week. So make sure to like the video and post a comment after the video is over and click the link in the description to win. The winner of last week will also be posted at the end of the video. So make sure to keep an eye on that. So here we go. So hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today. My name is John Miles, and I'm a senior consultant at Admissionado. I received my MBA from Fuqua, and right now I consult to early and growth stage companies, and by day, night, and weekends, I help you guys get into business school. So let's get into it. But first, I'm sorry, I just can't do this. So Lauren, our COO, she made me wear this sweatshirt, and it's just kind of, it's not me, it's totally not me. So I'm just gonna get a bit more comfortable here. So 1 second. Okay, much better. There we go. So thank you all for your time today, and be sure to post questions throughout, and I'll answer those at the end. So just continually post those, and we'll make sure we answer a bunch of them at the end and even after the presentation. So today, as you know, we're going to talk about the most common application mistakes that we see. And before I share these gems with you, I want to give you a bit of sense of sort of how we came up with them. Now, it doesn't matter if you are coming from consulting, banking, IT, former Olympic athlete, military, musician. These are really the most comprehensive ones that we've seen consistently across the board, no matter what your demographic, no matter what background you're coming from. Now, you might think, because I'm consulting a lot, that I would just whip up 5 and share them with you from my sole perspective. But if you think about that, it really wouldn't be consensus view, especially from our Admissionado standpoint. So what I did was I basically polled everyone of our consultants, and this includes, the McKinsey folks, the Stanford alums, our consultants who've been working for over 9 years, as well as our younger consultants who are, just sort of getting going and more familiar with the current questions that are being asked. So we kind of collated all of that information to give you these 5 mistakes. So again, this was an overwhelming consensus with these 5. So we're going to jump into them right now. And again, be sure to leave questions for us. So I'm just going to switch the presentation. 1 second. One second, everyone. Okay, so here we go. So let's dive in. So the first mistake we see really often is not answering the prompt. And how this comes about is really in a myriad of ways. And generally, if you think about this on a real basic form, it's showing that you really can't follow directions. So think about this, how we're going to look at this. So in multiple ways. And let's just start with the big one, which is, this is a question about leadership. This is a question about teamwork. I'm just going to go right into my main teamwork response that I'm using for every essay. What happens is you often will miss kind of keywords here. So by sharing what sounds good to you, and it's sort of just a forced fit response based on the prompt, typically is just not helpful to of course you're not differentiating yourself, but it also is just not helpful to the admissions committee. Now, thinking about this, let's say you do have a great leadership story or teamwork story or project-oriented story, and maybe it's very personal as well. So typically what we often see is not only not answering the prompt, but really forcing in a resume rehash. So all you're doing is essentially creating a laundry list in paragraph form of what you've accomplished, as opposed to being introspective and turning inwards and getting personal. And when you do this, that's how you start to differentiate yourself. Because remember, as an MBA applicant, many of us have all worked hard and are adaptable and have been in multicultural settings. But that's good, but you have to dive in to see how unique your specific experience in a certain geography or your experience as a team leader is different. So that's where you turn inward and get quite introspective, as opposed to just saying, I led a team on a bicycle ride, for a fundraiser, things like that. Also, when you think about the prompt, this is common because the more schools you apply to, the more, of course, tendency to do this. And that is repurposing, similar but not the same essays from other schools. And what you end up doing is force fitting them into other applications. So again, the way to think about this specifically with your own work is think about the school, get in the frame of mind of the school first, then start to think about, well, what are the school's values? What are the principles here? Take that information and then look at the prompt and sort of see where do these combine? Because again, if you're just using the teamwork essay or the weakness essay from every school and throwing it in, you're going to be off a bit. Now, one of the most important ones, and I see this personally with my clients a lot, is these subtle words that we sort of gloss over with our eyes because in life we're so used to seeing things like why or how or in addition to. So think about, let's take more. So more is often in these questions, and what the admissions committees are cueing you into is don't think so much about, oh, I'm just going to take everything I've said before in the short answer or in the resume and just kind of twist it a bit. They're truly looking for more information. So make sure you emphasize something new that maybe the admissions committee would not glean from your short answer or the fill in the blank answers on the online application or your essays. And think about that. Now, similar to that, and this is one of the bigger ones, is why. So why is often, we all do this, right? We will shove it in at the end in that last paragraph when we realize we're kind of running out of room because we told a great story. Now, the great story, that's awesome. But we really want to see, again, how do you differentiate yourself? It's the lessons learned. It's what you personally took away and extracted and did something maybe as a result, or improved or grew as an MBA applicant. So think about that why, not so much in the context of, oh, I did it because it showed I had to do it or my manager told me. Do it in terms of, well, what you learned out of it and what you took from it. Similar to the word how. How is that show versus tell? So be careful here. We see this in resumes a lot, but be conscious of revealing not so much what you did, but in the methods you use. So examples are you led a team and you did these great things, but you really want to get into what you did. Did you have to work with different personalities? Did you have to overcome language barriers? Things like that, which you're going to encounter in MBA programs as well. Now, the second mistake, not researching schools. Now this, of course, is quite common, and so it shows up in many, many spots, sometimes with errors, which you just mistakenly put, and this has happened, the wrong school, or you've put in something about a school where it actually is not the vision or principles or mission statement of the school. So generally, this comes off to an admissions committee as, oh, we're just another top MBA program to which this applicant is applying. The way we see this, a number of ways, and I think that the general way to think about this before we dive into the specific points is really, guys, spend the time going to the schools, and more importantly, and I'll get into this, spend the time pairing yourself with that school. Really find a way, and you may in that process find that that's not the school for me. Maybe I shouldn't apply to that school, because I would say it's much better to apply to a smaller number of schools per se that you have a much better fit with, and you at least think that, as opposed to sort of canvassing, because it's going to waste your time and they're going to pick up on it quickly. So one more point to make before I dive in here: if you think about an admissions committee and what they're generally looking for, and let's say 4 key things. They're looking for whether you can do the work academically, your clarity of purpose, so those are your post-MBA long-term and short-term goals. It's your impact as an alumnus, so what you're going to bring to the school even after you leave after the 2 years or 1 year. And then really, it's your fit. It's how do you fit into the tapestry of the class or classes. And that goes for daytime executive. It's the same way to think. So the first one, of course, is using the info session speak and literally cut and pasting professors and courses that may have to do with what your track you're on and throwing them in there. I would advise a better way to think about this is think always in terms of anecdotes. It's the conversations you've had with alums, the random coffee you had with a student. Really inject those into the essays as opposed to just going off the website, because it's universal. We can all access that. But again, you're not differentiating yourself when you're sort of plug and playing with what is prevalent or available to all. The better way to think about this is to really get personal, anecdotal, and that maybe you can't visit a school, but there's still plenty of other ways. And with technology now, whether it's email or phone call, there are other ways we can engage folks that are familiar with the program and add to and show that you've done the research. The second one is and this is important, and I've mentioned this before, but if you think about the question we see often is how do you fit into the program? If you think about fit is really an equation. It's a fit of, it's basically an equation of your values and principles should somewhat equal and align with the school's culture and mission. So if you have examples of leading things and being kind of taking initiative, well, maybe you belong in a student-run school. If you have an ability to sort of start things and be kind of entrepreneurial, and then that doesn't have to be a company that's had a liquidity event. It can be as small as something you did when you were younger. Look for schools like that. So again, you're fitting with their mission. It's really the best way to answer it. And if you don't find that match, then it may be not a school you should research and apply to. And then lastly, and this is tricky because, you know, employers will change which schools they recruit at. But in terms of future employers, if you talk about employers in your goals, and they've never gone to the school and you don't see any statistics about recruiting there, it gives a little bit less confidence to an admission committee to say, hey, you know, this applicant is going to get an internship, and we are confident that they will meet those goals and we can help them get there. So, and again, I would say also, though, we don't know sometimes because they may change, but just generally take some time to look at who recruits at these schools. And you don't want to necessarily choose something just because they recruit there. It has to match with your overall, your goals. But again, think about that when you research. Now, that's really why not researching is bad. Now let's look at why it's good. I touched upon this, but it all has to do with one word, and that's authenticity. And the way that authenticity will come out, let's say if you get is in an interview, if you get an interview, that's the one place where you're going to get, okay, so tell me about yourself and why do you want to come to our program? That's the one question, especially in an interview, that if you don't have down and you don't have a legitimate, genuine, and I emphasize genuine story, it's going to show up, and you will have shown that you haven't really researched the school. And think about, you know, I want to qualify that word research. Research has a sort of a scientific and objective tone to it. I'd like you to put more emphasis on not only researching, but getting out there, talking to people, getting evidence of anecdotes and things you've done. And, you know, most of those just happen because you've been introduced to people or people have shown interest in you. So don't force it. But again, the more actual anecdotal evidence you can do, and you don't want to overdo it, the better. So now let's look at mistake 3, which is basically goals lacking support feasibility. And we're going to dive into this. This is important. There are layers to this. And, you know, a lot of you will say, well, I'm not sure what I want to do. I want to use the 2 or 1 year as an exploratory time period. And that's legitimate. People do that, and I did it, and many of us do. But at the same time, we do want to have some sense of why we're going back, and why we're going back is often because of something we are trying to achieve or get to. And it may be vague now, but of course, you know, you'll determine that. And of course, in the essays, there are certain aspects of what we call weak goals, and the first foremost one being, and we'll talk about career changers and transition folks as well, but this idea that, you know, what you've done in the past really has no connection to what you want to do in the future. So it's important to have that your past experiences really do inform and shape both your short-term and long-term goals. It doesn't have to be a completely linear fit, and it's not going to be per se. But the idea is that, you know, there are things in your past that you've done generally that are going to, combined with an MBA, assist with your getting to where you want to go. So make sure you really think hard. And now about that. Now, if you think about transitions and career changers, and someone might say, well, you know, John, I'm going from working in finance, and now I want to go work in consumer packaged goods marketing, brand marketing. What you do is you have to look at, separate the content of your work from the tasks of your work and the function. So for example, there's plenty of things that you will have done in finance that have elements that will help you in branding at a major consumer products company, for example. You have to dive into that and separate what looks like, oh, it's financial work, to what's beneath. What are the things that you're doing to do that financial work? And those are characteristics that really apply across sector. And those are things you can talk about if you're a career changer or transitioning away from something and using the MBA to do so. The other one is a combination. So let's start with the long-term goal. Remember, you always want the long-term goal to really naturally lead from the short term. So your long-term goal really should be grounded in elements of the short term. So sometimes folks will choose a long-term goal, right? That is really not only not ambitious enough, but an admissions committee might even question how crucial an MBA is to even get there, let alone the short-term goal. So now, in the vice versa lens, you've got short-term goals that can be too ambitious, and when this happens, you essentially have you have people reaching for things that maybe are actually more longer term. So again, the natural step is to go back from go out from a short-term goal to the MBA, and then using that MBA as a launch pad for both the short-term and long-term. But again, the focus here is these have to make some sense and be attainable. They can't be too ambitious. Or they can't be ambitious enough. So looking back now at your past, often we see, and this goes for whether you have a PhD in engineering or material science, or you came from a liberal arts school, there's a tendency and admissions committees want to be known as you need them. You need them for something. And oftentimes people will say, well, I went from a liberal arts school, or I was in engineering university for 4 years and then did a PhD, and I lack business. I need business knowledge. And what you're doing there, it's subtle, but you're sort of saying, well, you need to fill a gap for me. And if you fill the gap, then I'm going to be on my way. Twist this a bit and focus less on an MBA sort of filling gaps and more as a launch pad. And it's going to give you help you see that great vision you have for a new medical device patent or something like that. It has to be big and bold. But if you retreat to the past too much about gaps and default and what you lack, and you're sort of filling it has a different connotation. MBA programs really want to see that they're helping you go forward, not as much giving you something that you lacked from 5 or 6 and even longer years ago. And then lastly, and maybe some of you will smile at this, but there's that consulting default, which is essentially, well, I don't really know what I want to do, John, so I'm just going to say I'm going to go do consulting. I've done a lot of consulting after business school, but I didn't say that in my essays. I discovered it because it became something I enjoyed doing. But I would say if you're going to talk about consulting, you really, because of the commonality of it, I'm not by any means saying don't say it at all. I'm saying make sure you really ground it and couch it in very important details from your past, and you can really give a good reasoning why consulting makes the most sense for you. And that can be long-term too, and that often can be after a short-term goal. But don't just by default throw it in there and put some stuff around it, because they'll be able to tell that. But by no means am I saying don't choose that. Just make sure you have a good argument and can support it. And then number 4, so impact with accomplishments. This is so this pops up in a lot of places. So both your essays, your resume, and your interviews. This is probably a very common thing we see. Obviously, we chose this because it's one of the most common ones. But it's really saying that you haven't done the necessary introspection as to what happened when you did something. So stepping back, we as pre-MBA applicants, many of us have accomplished a lot. Patents, inventions, speaking arrangements, leadership roles. Those are hard to argue about. Well, I am differentiating myself because I was the valedictorian or president of a club, or even Olympic athletes. There are Olympic athletes applying, they're military folks. You have to go much deeper and talk about, well, you did something that was extraordinary or remarkable or exceptional, and you have to get into what exactly was the impact of that. Now that impact can be clients, it can be companies, it could be personal, it could be family, but really focus on that, because that shows you've actually thought and you've given some substance to that act, that accomplishment. So where we see this in the resume is a lot of that participatory language. So I was responsible for a report for a $50 billion client every quarter. What about you were responsible for a report which you did in X ways and for a client and it impacted them this way? Something like that. Responsibility, participatory, again, that's not showing anything unique about what you've done. Many people have worked with clients every quarter and done great reports for them. Again, we have to, and if there's no quantitative, I know many of you may be thinking that, there's always good qualitative impact, because again, not all of us keep track of everything we did many years ago each week. So, and we don't have those metrics, or they're confidential. So in that regard, always keep just a sense of what qualitative impact may have it had. The other one, of course, and I mentioned this before with the essays, is telling what you did rather than showing how you did it. Now, an example of this is the classic, I led a team of interns, or I mentored a team of interns during a summer internship, for example, and we accomplished, they were all hired. And so that's a great end result. But there's nothing about what happened in those 3 months, how you mentored them, how they got hired, what did management think of them, and you were an integral part of that. So you want to reveal that piece. And then lastly, not taking the admissions committee sort of behind the scenes of your accomplishment. So there is often, we have choice, we have options, right? At work, we may not at times, but in general, if you're going to do a fundraiser, and you're going to lead a team, or you're going to raise money, let's say in one of your extracurriculars, there's a reason you're doing that. And there's got to be some level of emotional hit that you give to the admissions committee that reveals sort of what intrinsically motivated you to do that, to take on something you weren't required to do, unlike at work sometimes where we are. But even there, reveal the motivations for stepping in and helping someone at work who, maybe you have to take 3 days off, and you accumulate. Now that's very specific, but things like that. What motivated you? What was the tipping off point and catalyst? Now, lastly, and this is near and dear to me in particular, because I've done a lot of interviewing over the years at my prior company and have seen different styles. And the key thing with interviews, before I even talk about our point here, is you can really be over prepared. And there's a sense for today, just to talk about myself, where I prepared for this presentation, there's a point where I have to, really feel and go with what I'm feeling, because I know the content and I can't go off scripts necessarily. So you remember this, if you go in and you're kind of frenetic before the interview and you've got your index cards of all the things you want to say, it's much, much easier if you just sort of come in less rehearsed. Why? Well, you're going to come across as just more interesting and enthusiastic. It's this idea that let the conversation go as it should, because what happens is if you come into rehearsed, you've already pre-planted sort of thoughts and preconceptions about what you want to say. And what happens is you get a question and then you answer it kind of scripted, and you've realized, like the essay prompts, you haven't actually listened to the interviewer and you haven't answered the question, because you're like, oh, he said teamwork, it must be teamwork, or she said collaboration. So the compelling way to do this is treat it like a conversation, and I can't emphasize this enough. Just pretend you're having a conversation with the same admissions committee member that you ran into in the hallway a year before during a visit. Just make eye contact and really be, in a sense, in the moment. Engage them too. People always want to be asked advice. People like to be asked questions. Use that to your advantage. Don't be, quote unquote, on the defensive. You want to kind of be on the offensive. And that goes in terms of showing interest in the school, listening to the interviewer, and really being again, present. Because when you're too scripted, you're totally not present. You're thinking of what you've compiled to kind of spew forth. So similar to what we talked about with the essays, and you can see how some of this all comes together. Don't sort of have those prepared responses. And you might say something and you know it so well, you might actually end up repeating a cultural value of the program or a mission statement principle. It's fine to link yourself to those, but if you come across as reciting them, and entering into, you just come across as fake, and you're lacking that genuine authenticity that we've talked about really during this entire talk today. Lastly, this is key. Your resume, they have all your information. They have your accomplishments. They have plenty on you. This is about emotion. Why do we buy certain products? Why do we buy an iPhone versus a Samsung? It's emotion. It's some attachment. You want to bring yourself to life in the way that they look at you and they say, you know what, we've got to we want to engage this person more. We've got to talk to this person more. But let's give him admission or her admission, or let's talk to them again. You have to show that, because the resume, they have all that, and it's boring. Accomplishments get boring after a while. You really want to show that you've thought about this deeply and that you're excited about the school, if you indeed are. So with that, I'm going to return back. So 1 second while I come back here. Okay. And I have some questions coming in. So 1 second here. So before we get into questions, I want to Just gonna get some water. And I want to thank you all first for letting me share these points with you. We'll get into questions. I hope you found these comments helpful. And if you liked a bunch of free resources, do swing over to admissionado.com and check us out. And also, just a reminder, GMAT Club is running the giveaway where one of you will have a chance to win GMAT Club tests every week. So make sure to like the video and post a comment when we're done after the video is over. And they'll also be announcing the winner of last week will also be posted at the end of the video. So again, be sure to keep an eye out on that. So again, it's John Miles from Admissionado. I want to thank you all for listening and happy to take questions both now and even after, which we can post separately. So thank you. Okay, so I'm just going through the list here and some good questions so far. Let me just see. I'm just going to do some random ones. So, okay, this is a good question. This is a really good question. So the question is, so this is, well, gosh, there's so many good ones. Okay, so here's a question. Is there a way to update admissions about an improved GMAT score after you submitted the application? Does that work in any way? So good question. So generally, I would advise you to check per school because there are nuances to this. For example, I had a client recently who had a similar situation, and they are going to be, their provisional score will literally come in like a couple days after a deadline. In that case, it was fine. But again, I would check with each school. And again, just in general, folks, with asking questions to admissions committees, it's better to ask them and be safe. Don't ever feel that that they're reviewing or thinking they're looking at as part of your application. You don't want to make mistakes where you look back and say, oh, I didn't know, or because you just didn't feel like they're open to that. They typically have dedicated folks that get back and are very responsive. So I would just encourage you in general. But again, a good question, and it does generally depend per school, but excuse me, overall from my experience, there is a kind of a window that a lot of them will allow. Okay, here's another good one. So in my opinion, what has been the biggest resume mistake that people have made? So I'll start really generally. So people make just formatting and typos. People still do that. And I always tell people, right before you submit, go through with the cursor on the Word doc, line by line, space by space. You just don't know. Anything could be a reason for someone, if they think that you don't have attention to detail, it's better just to cover. Now, stepping away from that, which we should all do naturally. The biggest one I see is you see this with people who come from both technical backgrounds or very, very domain specific. That could be healthcare, they could be physicians, engineers, they could be in finance and trading. Resume has a tone of the language of what they did. So there's an assumption that admissions committee folks will necessarily know the lingo of what you've done, and that really is a bad assumption. They generally won't. In terms of basic general management things, they surely will. But if you're coming and you're doing things that are very unique to you, that is something to think about, and not have a language of your past, so to speak. So make sure you dumb it down and you translate phrases, and that may mean a longer bullet, but it's important to not assume that they're going to be able to really understand what you're saying from those from what you did prior. And then let's see another one here. Let's see. So this is great. So this has to do with letters of recommendation, which we didn't cover. So let's get into that specifically. So how do you make sure that your recommenders align with your accomplishments? And if you're not super comfortable to discuss your recommendation content with them. So here, I would say that if you're not comfortable discussing, that sort of content or your work with them, it's not the right recommender. And you see this sometimes where people really haven't done as much and put as much research, not only into the school like I talked about, but really into the recommender, and to say, is this person the right person? Again, make sure for each school they can differ slightly. Make sure you see what specifically each school is asking. So some may do peer evaluation. They may say, how is this person relative to their peers? Some may say, what constructive feedback have you given them? think of each recommender you choose really per school. It's very hard to canvas. Sometimes it works, but right now, and I'm seeing this more often, a lot of the recommendation questions on the letters of recommendation are getting much more diverse. So you can't use the same 2 per school. So to answer that, again, really make sure that the recommender matches to the school, because you don't want them to come back and say, well, I never gave you constructive feedback, or I never saw you working in that light. And that's a tricky thing. So here's another one that just came in. Okay, so how will an AdCom see an older candidate who comes from, it's just general, may come from government or military, and his work experience has been around government, or her or his. So I would say, that's a good question. So I went back, for example, I went back at 30 years old, daytime, full-time at Fuqua. I think, forget about average age for a section. Let's focus on you. I think the focus here is to think about the wisdom. I mean, age brings about more experiences. I'm not saying that if you're younger, you can't, I mean, our lives go on different trajectories. But in general, if you are an older applicant, not the pressure, but the focus is on really bringing out how you're going to be able to contribute even more, both not only as a student, but as an alumnus. Because if you get focused in sort of saying, well, I did this, and that's an 8-year window, that's a long time. And there's a lot of elements of leadership that you probably will have had due to promotions, or outside of work. So make sure that if you're an older applicant and focus and have maybe, let's say, government work only, there are things, again, like that example with working with athletes, or if you're a career transitioner, there's certain core principles you have from those experiences that will apply to an MBA and thereafter. So you want to step away necessarily from the content of the work, i.e. government work, and focus on the functionality and some of the more general management work you did there, because you surely did. So I'm going to take, let's see, let's see, one more here. And again, we'll answer more that may come in offline. So this is, okay, this is the last one. So this is about people who have kind of fractured work experience of a short amount of time. So let's say you've been working for under 3 years and you've worked in either 3 or 4 positions or 2 or 3 sectors. That's common now, because we're seeing people who have jumped on into startups out of school, and then they realize due to funding or some other reason that wasn't for them, and they end up going somewhere else. It's more of a trend now. So I think admissions committees are seeing it more. It's not taken negatively. A lot of people think, well, I have to have tenure. There are a lot of reasons why we don't have tenure at a company that are completely out of our control. Right now in Southeast Asia, for example, you've got a lot of financial services fracturing going on, where people are not getting promoted after 2 or 3 years, and they have to talk about that. A lot of that's out of control. The thing with admissions often is think about what you can control and talk about that. Don't dwell on things unless you're asked about things you can't. So in your case specifically, I would say, and anyone else who has sort of, fractured is a good word, work experience under 3 or 4 years, talk about how much you extracted from each and every one of them, and look at them sort of finitely, and say that, maybe one of them prepared you for the next one of the 3 or 4. But don't get focused so much on the jump around piece as much as what you've been doing while you were there. Because if you were flat at each thing and you really weren't contributing, that's a negative view. But if you were at least showing something, and then a company got bought and people were laid off, or a company didn't raise funding, for example, or the financial markets crash, those are things out of your control. And you want to think about in the application with admissions what you can and can't control. That's very important. So I think, so I'm going to wrap up right now, and I will thank you again for tuning in today. Again, it's just been great. I hope this has been helpful, and appreciate your time. Thanks very much.